Okay, Bianca, that's a wonderful conversation that we're having. And STESA, we've been talking about sexual assault, the effects, how people can recover, how we can help people. And one of the questions that it's been on my mind for a while is if, let's say I'm a young person, I have a friend, and my friend I has been assaulted. She doesn't want to, she's afraid to deal with it. How do I talk with her? Like, how can I be a supportive friend? And what could I do? What would you recommend?
I think I get asked this question too from youth directly as well. And I always reiterate the believe, listen, support piece to the extent that the person is aware of what's going on, right? So if they have been disclosed to personally, in that moment, making sure that they're being verbally and emotionally supportive in that moment, letting the person know that they care about them, that the way that they're reacting to their assault is a valid response, because there isn't a right way to respond to sexual assault. Some people will be angry, some people will feel guilty, some people will be completely numb. So there isn't a right way to respond. So however it is that they're feeling, validating their feelings, also letting them know that it's not their fault. Because they may be blaming themselves. They, grew up in the same society, the same culture that we're trying to change. So they may be using those same victim blaming statements that they have heard on themselves of like, maybe I shouldn't have that much to drink. Maybe I shouldn't have gone, I shouldn't have gone there in the first place. I should have known better, things like that. So letting the person know it's not your fault. And then offering support. So if you heard about STESA, if you have their hotline, offering that. And it's really important too for the person to take care of themselves, because obviously like they're taking on all of this information, they're taking on whatever emotions the person is feeling, whatever their reaction is, so they have to make sure they take care of themselves. And letting folks know that, again, even if you yourself haven't experienced sexual assault directly, we know that it can affect you as a loved one. So our hotline is there for you too. And if you have questions about, I don't know what to say, or I think I said this wrong, what do I say now? Like, how do I approach this subject? Our hotline is there for you. So you can speak with an advocate who can guide you through that. So you could best respond in the best way.
Yeah. And I was thinking about the what might stop someone from sharing. And I was reflecting on my youth, which is, a little ways back from yours, but we were really shamed around our sexuality. There was a lot of shame and secrecy and sexual orientation. So if you're a person that's feels, struggling with your sexual identity, orientation, as a young person, struggling with feelings about your own body, and then something happens,
Mm-hmm.
you may feel ashamed to speak up for yourself. Well, I don't want to draw attention.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I don't want to cause trouble. It's okay. I can deal with it. I can deal with it
Yeah.
in that silencing. And also culturally, as an immigrant myself in a, Latino culture, sexuality was disowned and wasn't talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would probably feel like I would be further shamed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure you see these things all the time. And I just wondered what you would say and how you would um, address someone who's feeling a lot of shame about what happened to them.
I think you make some very, very good points. And when I have conversations with youth, we often talk about the gender binary. So we're like, so what does it mean to be, what society considers a norm for a lady, and what is this, what does society consider a norm for a man? And when we talk about ladies, they're like, well, you have to be obedient, you don't want to be rude. So, what does that look like with consent? People feel like they can't say no because they don't want to seem rude or like they're bothering someone. Also, the piece of you can't, there's a lot more modesty there. You can't show too much skin. You can't, have many sexual partners because then you're viewed in a certain way, and we know the gender slurs used there. So, there's those lines that those who are socialized as women are navigating. And yeah, when it comes to sexual assault, we see that come up. We see this, you know, if you were taught to be obedient, they're not going to speak up about their boundaries or feel like they can speak up. If you're taught, well, you're not supposed to have many sexual partners, and if you do, you're this, they're like, okay, this happened to me, I can't talk about it because then I'm going to be called that. And we see that sort of harassment sometimes when someone does disclose on social media, where people are being bullied. Oh, you're this, or of course that happened to them, they're this, like things like that. But I think it's always going back to the educational piece, that we have this information. I'm hoping that we get this information to folks in our community. And obviously we're offering the emotional support to survivors. We're letting them know it's not your fault. We believe you, but it's also letting them know about these myths and facts of like, well, did you know it doesn't just happen to this group of people? Did you know that it wasn't your fault because it has nothing to do with what you were wearing? Did you know that coercion is a thing? So even though you said yes to appease your partner, that wasn't consent, things like that. We can always pass that information on, and that could be support in of itself.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so well put. I mean, it's so important for us to allow that space. I mean, boundaries, that word boundaries is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, this is my body, and I have
Right.
boundaries around my body of
Mm-hmm.
who I want near me in terms of physical space, touching space, verbal energy coming toward me. I have a right to my space and my
Yes.
boundaries. I was never educated about that as a woman. Never,
Mm-hmm.
never.
Yeah.
And
And
so we've learned so much. Go ahead.
well, the piece with boundaries, and I get asked too, well, how do we teach this information to younger kids? Like, I don't want to talk to a child about sexual assault. And I'm like, that's fine, but we can start with consent. And sometimes students will
Yeah.
bring this up of, well, when I go to a family party, my parents make me hug everyone in the room. And sometimes I don't want to hug anyone in the room or everyone in the room. But they tell me, if you don't, you'll seem rude. If you don't, we'll get upset. So we're already placing that information and or instilling that information in kids of like, you don't have autonomy over your body. You can't say no because then there's backlash or there's a negative consequence, and they take that on, the fact that they feel like they don't have a right to consent. So it can be taught, boundaries can be taught at a very, very young age, which leads into all of
Yeah.
this information.
Yeah. Remember those programs we had in the schools, and I'm sure you're incorporating them about touch, for small children, that you can say no, the touch that doesn't feel good,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't want it, to be able to say, I don't like that. I mean,
Right.
educating them at a young age about, what doesn't feel good and safe to me. I mean, I remember as a young girl, an adolescent, going to these family reunions and parties, and the uncles, honestly, the hugging went on a little too long, was a little too hard, and a little too affectionate. But like you said, you couldn't say anything because you don't want to hurt Tio so and so and Uncle
Mm-hmm.
so and so, and
Mm-hmm.
you were just you just suffered it, and you went, oh well, that's, why make a big deal of it. That
Right.
was always, why make a big deal of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it did it, and you learn to just hold it in. And then as more and more, where do you then start to put boundaries? And a lot of these cultures where you're not allowed to have personal boundaries, I imagine you see a lot of people coming in with stories of boundary violations, sexual assault, um,
Yeah.
and not knowing how to say no.
Right. Right. That not being able, not being empowered with the ability to say no, like you think that you can say no. And it's interesting because
Mhm.
whenever I've done presentations, and this has been with adults, they will message me later and say, you know what, I didn't know that what happened to me was sexual assault until you defined coercion, until you defined consent, until you defined the sexual assault umbrella. Because how you mentioned, oftentimes we something happens, our intuition is telling us this is a little off, this doesn't feel right, this feels uncomfortable, this feels violating, but we will convince ourselves like, oh, maybe that's just how they are, that's the culture here, things like that. Um, but when we sit down and we have these conversations, people start to realize like, well, that was coercion. You know, my partner made me feel bad when I would say no. My partner would threaten me, or they would,
Mhm.
even if it's polite, they would beg until I would send them a picture, things like that. That's pushing boundaries. That's not accepting someone's no, or accepting someone's I'm not sure. That's trying to convince them otherwise. And that's not consent.
Yeah, just my last question was exactly to that point. Husbands and wives, partners, um, there's sexual assault happening in a
Yes.
lot of families and a lot of couples in relationships. But do we dare call that sexual assault? Is that sexual assault? If
Yeah.
one partner is forcing themselves on another?
Right. And it's by definition sexual assault. If it's unwanted, right? Any unwanted sexual contact, non-consensual, that's sexual assault. And another myth is that people think that a perpetrator is a strange person in an alleyway at night waiting to attack, right? Just like some creepy person waiting to attack. And it's not, that's not the case. In 80 to 90% of cases, it's someone the survivor knows. It's someone who has access to the survivor, someone who has the survivor's trust, and they take advantage of that. So we know what happens in partnerships. We know what happens between married folks. And just because you're married, just because you're together, just because you live together, doesn't mean that you don't ask for consent. Because consent is specific to the time and it's specific to the action as well. And being married doesn't mean there's a contract where you're like, yep, no consent from now on. It doesn't work that way. People still have boundaries. People still have the right to say
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. See, that's whole new world for a lot of cultures,
Hmm.
you know,
You're right. Yes.
ownership.
Hmm.
You're married, I have ownership, you know.
Right. Well,
And
that
so
was.
you're really throwing a lot of stuff out there. You know, what? I can just have her anytime I want, you know what?
Mhm.
We're married. But, you know, this is very important education for our youth. And as we're getting to the end of the conversation, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this, Bianca. And I know that you go to the schools and you educate and you do so much work in our community. And I'm so grateful that STESA is here, that you're here, that we can call and get your support for situations in our community. So thank you. Number one, thank you. This is not easy work that you're
Oh,
doing. I know it firsthand. It's not. And then I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to say what, anything that you wanted to share that's in your heart or in your mind with our community, with anyone here. Um, what would you like to leave us with?
ooh, that's a great question. I think what I've in the year and a half that I have been working here and with my experiences with our community members and experiences with our organizations is that I am inspired every day by our youth. I'm inspired every day by the work that our community does because even though change happens very slowly, we know it's happening. And I see it when I talk to community members, when I talk to youth, and they're like, oh, yeah, I knew this already. Or like, oh, yeah, I heard about this. Or we actually talk about this stuff at this other organization I'm a part of. And I'm like, wow, when I was your age, we had no idea what any of this was. And to me, that's so inspiring because it's like we can have these conversations now. And when I was, in high school years back, we wouldn't. And if anything, we would be doing the harmful things. We would be doing the backlash. We would be doing the victim blaming. So it's very inspiring to me to see this change. And also to folks who aren't there yet, where they have this information or aren't ready to be agents of social change, is that you can be. We all play a role in ending sexual assault. We can all do something to challenge these ideas, to challenge victim blaming, to challenge traditional gender roles, to challenging all other forms of oppression. We all play a role. And it could be something small as, passing this information on to a family member, a friend, or if you hear the comment and you feel like you can say something like, hey, that's not cool. Why do you think you need, why do you think that's okay? Or let's have a conversation around this. But we all play a role. And sexual assault is a learned behavior, and it could definitely be unlearned. And that's what we're trying to get to. So yeah, that's pretty much what was going through my mind, especially considering our community, that we have the capacity to create so much change, and we're doing it little by little, but we're all doing our part. And I hope to see more of that.
Mm, that's beautiful. Thank you, Bianca. What a wonderful interview, your passion and dedication and your agency. So please visit stesa.org, call the hotline if you need to or need information. Participate in the events all month, particularly the youth events. Get your creative juices going and submit something to their campaign and keep the conversation going. Talk about it with your friends. You know, let's have a conversation and a dialogue. What do you consider inappropriate? What are boundaries? Let's keep it. I think dialogue and talking about difficult subjects is how we'll transform. So this has been a very enlightening conversation. I want to thank you, and thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties. And I look forward to sharing this interview and with our full community, our English and Spanish speaking community. So thank you, Bianca. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you. I'm sure we'll see you soon. Thank you for
Yes.
making time.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.